So realistically, a roadmap is talking about the future, and we're actually well on the journey towards standardization across a broad range of initiatives. There's TIC 4.0, the Open Shipping Standard, the DCSA. They're all developing standards, and these are largely grassroots initiatives. I don't think the question is so much who starts it, because it's been started. It's a question of how do we consolidate those standards where it makes sense, so we're meeting the first level of data standardization, which is that common framework to define what an individual point of data is, such that we're not independently developing 2 or 3 of them disparingly in those various standards. And then secondly, how do we adopt those into the whole international stage? Right now, those standards are largely happening in certain regional areas and not so much on the international level. And if we take that question a step further, you have to ask some questions about the ability of standards to be adopted. So in Europe, where ports are technologically quite advanced, that's something that's probably a significantly easier question to say, yes, we're going to adopt those. Whereas we move into Africa, the Middle East, India, where ports aren't as technologically capable yet, and perhaps the funding isn't there yet, those are also going to be really challenging questions. Ultimately, from my perspective, there needs to be an international body that eventually takes ownership, but right now it needs to stay in the grassroots because we need to continue the momentum. Realistically, broad working groups of interested parties are the best way to go, and there's multiple other industry standards from telecom to aviation where we can see examples of large bodies of competitors and third-party interested individuals coming together to create those standards lead to really effective standards that are relatively easy to adopt. Trust is probably the single largest factor. Collaboration then flows on from trust. So if I can trust you sharing data into my system and me sharing data into yours, that we're not going to use that in the wrong way, is definitely going to be the very first step. The second step is in developing, or rather implementing, systems that have been developed to leverage that data. So there's a range of software solutions out there, 2 or 3 come to mind, that leverage that data and can turn that into insights without technology. And that's really important. All of this standardization is really focused on technology, but without technology, achieving the sort of precision that we need to get just-in-time shipping to happen just won't happen. There's far too many moving parts for a planner in each individual port to be able to connect all of those dots. Technology is what underpins it. So trust in each other and trust in the technology. I think the best way to answer that question is to give you sort of an example from a parallel industry, which is aviation, part of my background. If you look at airport collaborative decision-making, which is their version of just-in-time shipping. It's about the aircrafts coming in when they need to, getting a bay, being assigned a gate, departing when they need to, having a slot on the runway to be able to take off, and when they come into their destination port, having a slot in the landing sequence. When that standard was first implemented by Eurocontrol, there was probably only 4 or 5 airports. And whilst there was benefit for those airports, there wasn't benefit for the network. As that expanded to include dozens of airports across Europe, now the benefits are actually really quite substantial for the network as a whole. They're seeing significant improvements in utilization of runway space and utilization of the parking bays and gates available to aircraft. Very significant benefits from an environmental perspective. You don't have airplanes circling at a destination airport. So if you think about the network as a whole, we actually need to get to a certain degree of saturation. And in the shipping industry, I can't tell you if that's 5 ports or 20 ports, but there will be a point in the proliferation of that technology where we hit the actual returns coming back in a very significant way across the network. Data I don't think anyone would question it being what actually drives business efficiency today or business competitive advantage. If we look at the Amazons or the Alibabas of the world, the reasons they're excelling above traditional brick and mortar is they had a very technology first, which implies data first approach to how they did their business. And that's proliferated with artificial intelligence and machine learning further exasperating those products and services. Where I think we need to look at, as an industry is that actually data sharing is what actually is going to propel our industry forward and allow it to continue to both remain competitive but also drive efficiency. We heard a lot today about berth space becoming an issue over the next 4, 5, 10 years. Data and efficiency is how we first address those issues. Building additional berth capacity is extremely expensive. Investing in technology that allows you to use that existing infrastructure is actually relatively very inexpensive. And it's data that drives that, the ability to share data and to leverage the insights that data can glean. Biggest change is I have time left in my life. Writing a book, everyone sets out to, or thinks they want to set out to write a book, but I can tell you it's extremely time consuming. We got a lot of our initial predictions right. We've got, in the first part, there was a conversation around shippers looking for a way across the Arctic Passage, and of course we predict that the ice melts and so it opens up, but we've seen the shippers starting to look for an Arctic Passage route. We've seen some early trepidation around data and data exchange. At last year's conference, there was a lot of conversations around a hesitation to share data. I was at a tech summit in Hamburg not a few months after last year, and there was a conversation about the monetization of data and how that's the route forward, and we've already talked about the fact that I think that's the wrong approach. So hopefully we're wrong when we look at the early 2020 predictions of data wars. I really hope we are, but so far it's probably trekking a little bit in that direction. Some of the broader predictions around how goods are produced, we're starting to see. So there was a prediction around 3D printing changing dramatically commerce as we see it today. We have, there's some great examples in commerce. So Adidas has released their first 3D printed shoes. And that's a trend they're likely to see. You see major makeup manufacturers investing in augmented reality and bespoke niche products that are produced at the end site where the customer picks them up. And these are dramatically going to change the way goods travel around the world and what sort of goods travel around the world. In maritime, I had the luck of visiting the Port of Rotterdam's Innovation Center last year. And they've got 4 or 5 3D printing startups, one of which is focusing on 3D printing metals. And their scale-up business case was around 3D printing parts for ships that come into harbor, so you don't have to store lots of spare parts for ships. If a ship comes in, it's got a broken propeller or something else, you could just 3D print that in the time that it takes that ship to be unloaded and reloaded. So these technologies that we talked about are actually there, and they're genuinely promising to redefine our industry. Realistically, they're little microcosms of collaboration. A lot of the people in the room over there are my competitors whilst we're doing business, yet we're all sitting down and sharing ideas. If they're a blueprint for collaboration, that's already a good first step.